Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three martinis coming up.
So glad you are with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We have two good martinis for you today, so our average is now improving a little bit as the year gets going here. Jim, we're both still alive after shoveling a lot yesterday, at least by Northern Virginia standards, not so much by even more northern standards where I'm originally from, but in the words of the immortal Toby Keith, I ain't as good as I once was. It took a lot of time, and I'm not feeling as good as I was yesterday morning, I can tell you.
I was going to say, according to Mrs. Garrity, the early snow was powdery and light. By the time I went out in the afternoon yesterday, it had gotten very wet, very heavy, prime middle-aged to older man heart attack weather. Apparently, shoveling snow kills more people than any other activity. Skydiving, wildly safe, all that kind of stuff. You think, okay, I can handle this stuff. I'm in decent shape. For those wondering, yes, I do work out. I do actually have gym membership. But it turns out what you're doing at the gym isn't always the same muscles as you're getting down under because the bottom part is frozen, scraping it up. And, you know exactly which muscles you don't use. You don't exercise regularly when you go out and snow shovel for a stretch.
Jim, again, two good martinis. We'll be talking about speech in a number of different ways from Mark Zuckerberg at, I guess it's Meta now, which oversees Facebook and Instagram. And then also we're going to be diving into what you can and can't say in the UK as it relates to the rape scandal and a whole bunch more. Plus, in the middle, what we really like about how the Republicans are starting their legislative agenda. So stay tuned for all of that. Today's edition of the Three Martini Lunch is sponsored by BetterHelp. How's your 2025 looking? Are you excited about where things are headed? Do you feel like it's the same old, same old? Do you feel like it's really, really bad and you're not sure how it's going to get better? Well, maybe it's time to not just talk to a couple of people, but talk to people who have some expertise in helping you think through your issues and come up with concrete solutions to those things. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. And so, there's the big joke about your New Year's resolutions fading within a couple of weeks. How about we make 2025 different? Try BetterHelp.
BetterHelp, which is, by the way, one word, not two. It is fully online and makes therapy affordable and convenient and serves more than 5 million people worldwide. You can access a diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists with a wide range of specialties. And you can easily switch therapists anytime you like at no extra cost.
So in this new year, write your story with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/3ML to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our first good martini now. And it looks like Elon Musk has started a trend. Now it looks like Meta with Zuckerberg, that's Facebook, that's Instagram, I guess that's Threads as well, now saying they are going to make some drastic differences in their censorship policies over there as well. Here is Zuckerberg explaining the big picture first.
So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms.
All right, so what does that look like? Here's the first part of it.
First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US.
And so, Jim, a lot of people are looking at this and wondering whether this is genuine, whether this is Zuckerberg simply seeing where the country is right now, a good business decision. He also talks about how the censors in the past have squelched conversations about immigration and gender, mentioning those specifically, I think is significant. He also talked about how he needs to be cooperating now with the federal government when it comes to restrictive speech policies in Europe and China and elsewhere. And so I think the fact that he specifically mentioned the cultural tipping point of the last election gives away a little bit of the game. So who knows, where he's going to be 4 or 8 years from now. But, at least the guy understands where the tea leaves are leading him right now. And that's really good for free speech. It's just a question of how long.
I was going to say, you don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. This is a generally good step in the right direction. But, the implication from his remarks and the tone and what he said is that if Harris had won the election, everything at Facebook would be just fine. And it would stay just the way it is. First of all, I appreciate that he acknowledges that when you have AI or some sort of automated system doing these sorts of things, you're going to have stuff that is utterly innocuous or completely appropriate get swept up in this. And I think one of my favorite examples was a ad or a post for a European museum depicting Renaissance artwork. And it got taken down for nudity. Now, yes, there was a nude woman in the painting. I think we've all seen it. I don't think the kids are going to get... If it's good enough for people to look at in a museum, I don't think it's necessarily... It's not pornography. It's not adult. At reasonable, someone could have looked at that and said, this is not somebody putting up, pornographic trash or anything like that. This is a different, ball of wax. I also appreciate him pointing out that the fact checkers had gotten too political. I think my all-time favorite example of this was when Mitt Romney had said that the U.S. had the smallest Navy in X number of years. And the fact checker gave him a pants on fire ruling. That was technically true. Yes, it was the smallest Navy, but he wasn't accounting for the fact that the new ships are more powerful and have more armaments and better range and all these other factors. Now, you can mention that, but on the sheer, what is the size of the Navy? Romney was correct, and he got pants on fire. The off with their heads, harshest assessment. We see plenty of examples of that. I think one of the things we notice in fact checkers most often is when a Republican says something that is largely true, perhaps they get some details wrong, they will say it's false. If the Democrat says something that is, in a similar category, they might say that it lacks context or half true, or they'll bend over backwards to give them the benefit of that. And the other thing which I think is really, I find enormously frustrating about the fact checkers, Joe Biden several times said that the inflation rate was 10% when he took office. No, it was not. It was not even close to that. It was, and partially because of the low rate of increase in prices during the pandemic, it went in, like a 2%, very close to that level, very low, and it increased on his watch. Now, I'm sure fact checkers noticed. I certainly don't feel like they got the drumbeat on this sort of thing. Your Aunt Edna, who's always forwarding you emails saying that Joe Biden has sold the state of Nebraska to the Chinese, stuff like that. Yes, Aunt Edna gets a lot of stuff wrong. Yes, Aunt Edna is likely to fall for a hoax or something that's clickbait or something like that. And that's bad. And I'm not saying the fact checkers, but it always seemed like they came down like a ton of bricks on Aunt Edna and really gave the president a pass, or Democratic senators, a whole bunch of prominent, Kamala Harris. And it just seemed kind of infuriating that my standards are higher for somebody in a position of authority than they are for Aunt Edna, who also was convinced Milli Vanilli sang their own songs. That's just, the way. So it just seemed like the fact checkers always had their thumb on the scale. And you look at the user reaction on Twitter, kind of this crowdsourced fact checking. It seems to work out very well. Now, maybe that's my right of center perspective looking at this, but I do see a lot more playing fast and loose with the facts getting nailed. Most recently, I think it was a writer for Jacobin who claimed that BlackRock owns 1/3 of all U.S. houses. And that is not the case at all by remotely, I think when you add it up, they own like 0.065%. 0.065% and 33% are not the same. That's a pretty darn big difference there. So look, it's good. My colleague Charlie Cook basically gave this is a big indicator of the cultural trend, and it's a good thing. My other colleague Noah Rothman is like, this is clearly a response to government incentives. We should not be thrilled to see private companies saying, well, there's a different new administration's coming into town. We're changing our policies because we don't want them to be mad at us. That is not great. And yeah, I think probably Zuckerberg's a weather vane, and he will probably follow whichever way the political winds are blowing. But that having been said, this is good news for today, and we ought to celebrate these wins when we get them.
No, exactly right. And he talks about community notes, and obviously there's still some arbitration by the gatekeepers at X as to which posts actually get the community note on there. But the community note is basically more speech. That's the way to deal with it. All right, while Mark Zuckerberg retools his business, I'm sure you're taking a look at 2025 and figuring, what's the best path forward for me? How can I make my work more efficient for 2025 in my business? There are concrete steps you can take to make sure your business runs as efficiently as possible. And for more than 38,000 businesses, they have future-proofed their operations with NetSuite by Oracle, the leading cloud ERP platform. It integrates key business functions like accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one seamless system, ensuring that businesses are ready for the future.
Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and to seize your biggest opportunities. Closing your books in days, not weeks, means you spend less time on past reports and more time focusing on future growth. This will help you shift your attention from historical tasks to the strategic initiatives that will drive your business forward.
Exactly. The small business experts I talk to on a regular basis say there are things you need to let the technology do for you so you can focus on the things that you are best at and to help your business grow. NetSuite by Oracle, definitely a way to help you do that. So speaking of the opportunity that Jim mentioned, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/martini. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/martini. That's netsuite.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our second good martini now. And while we wait for the inauguration of President Trump on January 20th, the Republicans now control the House and the Senate so they can get to work. Part of that, of course, especially on the Senate side, is confirming the president's cabinet nominees, holding those hearings and so forth. But there's also legislation that can now begin the process of getting passed and maybe even, be ready for President Trump's signature as soon as he takes office. And each year there's always one bill that they want to kick off with, which is kind of like the no-brainer bill. Most Americans are for this. One time it was the Keystone Pipeline after the Republicans dominated the 2014 midterm elections. Last time, 2023, I think McCarthy led off with energy independence. This time, it's the Laken Riley Act. Laken Riley, of course, was the nursing student in Georgia, brutally murdered by a man in the country illegally, and also who had just been arrested for assault up in New York City. So now the Republicans, who brought this forward last year in the House, but the Senate Democrats, since they control the Senate, didn't take it up. This legislation is now back. It's led by Mike Collins, Republican of Georgia in the House, and Katie Britt, Republican of Alabama in the Senate. And basically, it says the bill requires the Department of Homeland Security to detain certain non-U.S. nationals, also known as aliens under federal law, who have been arrested for burglary, theft, larceny, or shoplifting. The bill also authorizes states to sue the federal government for decisions or alleged failures related to immigration enforcement. So basically, if you're in this country illegally, which really should be enough to get you kicked out of the country and taken into custody, at least if you're committing crimes when you're in this country illegally, you should be in the custody of DHS and hopefully on a fast track to getting out of the country. Now, politically, what's significant here, Jim, especially in a still relatively tight U.S. Senate, 53-47, is that John Fetterman is a co-sponsor of this legislation. So far, he's the only Democrat actually on board with this, which is kind of horrifying. But what do you make of the way Republicans are kicking off the session here?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's understandable that certain grassroots conservatives would be frustrated with what Republicans and their small House majority last session were able to get done. But this was a good example of the fact that you can pass something. You can pass something 435 to nothing. And if the Senate refuses to ever take it up, you can't go anywhere. We all remember how a bill becomes a law. I'm just a bill up on Capitol Hill. And if the Senate Majority Leader is like, no, this is going to help the opposition party, this makes the current administration look bad, it'd be a really tough vote for my members who are facing re-election, so I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist. There's really very little the House can do to change the mind of Chuck Schumer. What you have to do is change the Senate Majority Leader. And hey, guess what? We finally did that. And John Thune will be deciding what comes to the floor and when and how quickly. And that's going to be a big advantage to this. I suspect this will, this is something which I wouldn't be surprised if Fetterman is not the only Democrat. That at some point this creates a momentum of its own. Democrats realize they don't want to be on the other side of this. And also, to a certain extent, I figure it's going to kick the issue to sanctuary cities and will make the cities and localities say, well, we're not taking the metaphorical bullet on this one. We're not going to jump on that grenade. You guys want to keep protecting these people, you go right ahead. And again, pick up one of my recurring themes on this podcast. This is not Manuel the busboy. This is not somebody who simply has come to this country illegally and is now working, probably getting paid under the table, but who is otherwise, as far as I was about to say a good citizen, but they're not citizens, but otherwise, not violating a law, not a violent criminal, not DUIs, not the sort of things that make them a risk to the public. This is very basic common sense. This is the sort of thing that, I think you could say was one of the dominant messages of the election. And I'd like to see I'd like to see this become a real nonpartisan issue. I think that one of the lessons of this past year was to say, this shouldn't be a partisan issue. The only reason this is staying in place is because of the obstinacy of a Democratic Party that has completely misread public opinion and public sentiment and the consequences of these policies. And so great to see it. I can't wait for the day we talk about President Trump signing it into law. Good first step. Good to see Fetterman on board. All systems go. Let's keep going, fellas.
Nah, I think that would be great. You're going to need 7 Democrats to break a filibuster on that. Hopefully you can get them.
I mean, do they want to filibuster this? Really? Schumer? Really, Senate Democrats want to filibuster this? You going to pull that out? All right, go ahead.
Well, all you got to do is not vote for cloture now. Filibuster is so much easier to do than it used to be, where you got to actually stand there and argue for hours on end. But maybe we'll see. If the public pressure is high enough, I think you're going to get it. That's certainly some low-hanging fruit.
This is the sort of thing Trump will be very laid back about. I think if the Senate's did try to oppose cloture and not cut off debate and not let the legislation come to the floor for a vote, he'd be cool with it. There's no way that he'd go apoplectic on Truth Social and give a fiery speech or anything like that. To quote the cinematic classic Dodgeball, that's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it works out for him.
Exactly. But, you've got these other people around the country like J.B. Pritzker and the mayor of Boston and the governor of Massachusetts saying, oh, we're not helping Tom Homan and all these and ICE round up criminal illegals. Why? Why not? I don't understand your point at all. So it seems like a no-brainer, but, that requires having a brain and common sense on these issues.
Well, hopefully, Greg, this is the last time we'll talk about ridiculous crime and immigration policies in this podcast. Oh, wait. Stick around.
In the meantime, let's talk about Omaha steaks. I talked about it a lot leading up to Christmas. The steaks, amazing. So tender. Actually graded USDA certified tender. You're getting the best. The burgers are fantastic. The sides, the chicken, they even got wine and dessert. You can't go wrong. And now the good deals continue. You can subscribe. Subscribe now at omahasteaks.com/3ML and get 12 free Omaha Steaks burgers in every shipment. That's a value of $431. Plus, you'll get an extra 10% off and free shipping for the life of your subscription. So this new Omaha Steaks subscription gives you commitment-free flexibility with the ability to skip a shipment, swap selections, change your frequency, or cancel at any time. But it also helps to inflation-proof your purchases for your food. It's locked in. The prices are locked in for the life of your subscription. Make life easier by subscribing to the best. Subscribe to Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com/3ML and get 12 free burgers and free shipping for the life of your subscription, plus an extra 10% off today and on every subsequent subscription shipment. All right, on to the crazy martini and parental discretion here. If you've got little ears nearby, you really probably ought to hit pause for the moment and come back to us when it's just you and your ears. So this is the UK. You've probably heard a lot about this, especially if you're on X, because Elon Musk has been tweeting about it nonstop for a number of days now. And this is the whole rape gang story. They've been calling it grooming gangs, which kind of softens what's really been happening here. There was a report in Parliament, what was it, a short time ago, Jim, where allegedly over the last quarter century, some 250,000 British girls have been raped. And a lot of the problem here is through immigration and Muslim immigrants, seems like Pakistanis in particular, whether it's in Rotherham or elsewhere, luring in, I guess that's the grooming part, these underage girls, some as young as 12 and 13. It's just absolutely repulsive, being raped repeatedly by a number of people. And because of the cultural sensitivities, the police decided they didn't want to be insensitive or racist. So in a lot of cases, they just didn't look into it that carefully. Parents who found out about it, understandably completely apoplectic, they got in more legal trouble than the rapists in a lot of different cases. And of course, the UK has been all about cracking down on memes now, Jim. Memes can land you in prison. But of course, repeated raping of children. That's a whole different story. And the weird layer now is that for a time, the chief prosecutor in the UK, who was in charge of overseeing all this, is now the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who now says that if you're, deeply criticizing members of his administration, then, well, you're just hopping on the far right bandwagon. But in this era, Jim, I don't think those trite little lines are going to get away with it. But the BBC and other mainstream media outlets really didn't want to touch it. More conservative ones did, but they were basically called conspiracy theorists. So you devoted the Morning Jolt to this issue today. What were your big takeaways?
So I can hear listeners already wondering, well, it's coming to light and it's finally getting the attention it deserves. Why isn't this a good martini? And I could hear people saying, this is the most horrible topic you're ever going to hear about. Mm-hmm. Why isn't this the bad martini? Why is this the crazy martini? I'm very glad this is coming to light. And a good portion of it, front and center, is because Elon Musk is tweeting about it, although there's some other factors that led to this, which I'll talk about in a second. I do feel the weirdness, though, that if you've read conservative media in the United Kingdom or here in the U.S., you probably heard about this story. You probably heard at least something about this. And you heard about this, and you're horrified by it, and you're outraged by it. And it seemed like the response from the British government, both locally and nationally, was far too little, far too late. And you're like, well, I guess, Great Britain just no longer has the willingness to defend its citizens. And now all of a sudden it's brought back front and center. But this is like years ago. We're talking about 10, 15 years ago this was a story. So my colleague Abigail Anthony wrote I linked to this in today's Morning Jolt newsletter. It's a really good kind of summary if you feel like you've kind of forgotten the details of this story. And she does have a great paragraph about why is this front and center in social media now. And I'm just going to read a quick section here. Quote, the first is that some court transcripts revealing details about the gangs were recently released to the public. Second, judicial sentencing for the harrowing Sarah Sharif case occurred in December. It wasn't exactly about grooming gangs. It was exposed flaws in the immigration system, child services, and cultural assimilation. The judge of sentencing states that Sarah had 70 fresh injuries and 25 separate bone fractures when she died at age 10 in 2023 at the hands of her father, stepmother, and uncle, all fled to Pakistan after murdering her. Third, Jess Phillips, the United Kingdom safeguarding minister, recently denied an investigative inquiry into the gangs and suggested that such matters can be pursued by the local authorities, which, my colleague notes is a big task for a local authority and it's almost certainly insufficient to address nationwide problems. Fourth, and this is the real eye-opening one, the town of Rotherham was declared the Children's Capital of Culture for 2025. Such a title is like a giant middle finger to the city's long roster of child victims. And fifth, the abuse is still ongoing, not some historic tragedy that we can claim was quashed. Again, that's from my colleague Abigail Anthony. Read the whole thing. But so on the one hand, I am really pleased with this, that this is getting probably long overdue scrutiny. There are, Elon Musk has other beefs with the current British government and with the Labour Party, and that probably is exacerbating his ire. These people, as you mentioned, invoke the term far right. And they kind of wave it like a magic wand. And it's like, well, that person is far right. Therefore, nothing they say is valid. Well, no, folks. Actually, Elon might have gotten some of the details wrong on this. And it's not that Keir Starmer did nothing on this. I think you can make a strong argument that he did far too little, far too late, and it was nowhere near sufficient. And the scale of this, this goes back decades. There was one case of Telford in the United Kingdom, and the idea that there were probably more than 1,000 victims of this now over a 20 to 30 year span. This is a city of like 155,000 people. So you're talking Charleston, South Carolina, Paterson, New Jersey. This is not New York City. This is not some massive city. This is a fairly small city by Western standards. And 1,000 girls, and there are reports that keep coming in is that authorities didn't want to deal with it. And by the way, this was not merely, although definitely included, incestual child abuse. Sorry, we have to talk about this on our podcast today, folks. Sometimes the news is really terrible. But this was often like abductions or coercion or other circumstances of this, not within a family, not behind closed doors. And they would go to the police and very little, if anything, would happen. And if they did try to prosecute, the victims and their families would be threatened. And often, it made it very tough to get witnesses and victims to talk. And this went on for years after years. Now, I should point out, the British press did periodically get into this. The Times of London did some, Telegraph of the UK. People knew this was going on, and everybody kind of knew that the authorities were afraid to go after this because this would exacerbate anti-Muslim attitudes. I notice this is all happening in the context post 9/11, post 7/7 bombings in 2005. I remember that very vividly, being over in Turkey at that time. People were really worried about Islamist terror, and people were looking at the Muslim immigrant communities with suspicion. And I strongly suspect the authorities are like, well, if we tell people that there are gangs, systemic gangs of doing child sex abuse in this community, there are going to be people, riots in the streets. So we better just avert our eyes. Well, if that's the price of diversity, if that's the price of a tolerant multicultural society, that's a price that's too high. You cannot make a problem better by ignoring it. And I'm sitting there watching this, I see cops writing, both in the UK and over here. I see cops writing parking tickets. Let's imagine they said tomorrow we're going to have zero enforcement of parking tickets. There'd be some problems. People would be parking everywhere, but we could function. In the UK, you mentioned they're going after hate speech on social media. They'll knock on your door. They'll check, you could be facing real charges over that. If the police aren't willing to go after child sex abuse, why do we have them? What is your purpose? Why did you become a cop? Why did you become a prosecutor? Because that's when we really need you. The parking stuff, we social media hate, we'll deal with that. We can figure out if society can function without that. Society cannot function if there is this kind of systemic abuse of the most vulnerable. So on the one hand, I'm thrilled that this is getting the attention. On the other hand, if you've been reading conservative media for really the past 2 decades, you know who's really good on this? David French. I know everybody's like, I went to the New York Times, and he's, and David's tone is a little different now than it was back then, but he wrote really hard-hitting stuff about the widespread toleration of child sex abuse in Islamic cultures. People didn't love him for that. He wrote really effectively for this National Review way back in the day. Name is a blast from the past. Michelle Malkin, right? If you've been reading conservatives, this is nothing new to you. So I'm thrilled that this is front and center. But there's a little bit of a, if I don't want to say, it would feel inappropriate to use my usual diehard quote in this situation. But just where you been, man? Where's everybody been? Why, great. This is still going on, apparently. This requires a much firmer police response. Hopefully we'll finally get it, but it just seems utterly bizarre that it took Elon Musk going on a Twitter tirade to really get the attention on this that it long deserved.
Yeah, and the prime minister and his other officials in his administration still don't want the national inquiry. So they're still standing in the way of getting to the bottom of it, even though a lot of it has been revealed with no thanks to the government and the media in many situations. But the truth is coming out, and they're still not wanting the full truth to come out. Absolutely infuriating.
They keep insisting, if they have another national inquiry in this, that they can't enact the recommendations of the past national, 7-year investigation. First of all, 7-year investigation. How many people got victimized in the 7 years you were investigating this? Secondly, why? Why? If they've been saying you need to devote more resources to this, if you need to prioritize this, if you need to do more to protect the victims and their families from retaliation, why can't you do that while also doing this national? This feels like real excuse making. This feels like real, we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. So if we open up another national inquiry, the entire UK government can't do anything until more is done. So this feels like some really, I know British slang, bad words, but I'll refrain from using them on this podcast, Greg.
Labour got swept into power in a landslide in July. That must seem like a lifetime ago for Keir Starmer. I believe his popularity is now below 20. And the longer he tries to resist on this issue, we're going to find out if you can actually go to 0 on an approval rating, because I have a feeling we're going to find out. Jim, have a great Tuesday. Hopefully much less disturbing stuff to talk about tomorrow. I'll see you then.
It's a low bar to clear. See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. They do help us a lot. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Tuesday. Join us again on Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.